through the pipeline. And our intention is to deepen that level of flow. Now, the context is a tougher context than a year ago. The United Nations, the UNCTAD World Investment Report for 2020 recognized that investment across the world, not just South Africa, but across the world, is going to be sharply down. They expect a drop of about 40% in FDI flows. They project that even next year in 2021, there would continue to be a decline in FDI flows, and they expect a recovery by 2022. And of course, they say the outlook is tentative and uncertain. The prospects of foreign direct investment recovering robustly and quickly depend on the duration of the COVID crisis and the effectiveness of policy instruments to deal with the various challenges and to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. They characterize the pandemic as a supply shock, a demand shock, but also a policy shock that affects foreign direct investment. For South Africa, our intention is to use the opportunity of the investment conference to showcase new possibilities, new opportunities in South Africa. So in an environment globally where sentiment is bearish, when people are cautious, when the pause button is pressed by many investors, we want to make sure that South Africa stands out and opportunities in the market are identified. Two critical opportunities present themselves. The first is the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is the most ambitious trade reform package that has been put together in this period anywhere on the globe, and it envisages potentially as many as 1.2 billion consumers who will be connected through a continental free trade area with significant manufacturing opportunities on the continent. In fact, it's been estimated by the World Bank that there would be, over the period of the continental free trade area, by 2035, it would be adding annually something of the order of 7 trillion rand to the GDP of African countries, the continental, about 450 billion US dollars. So conference will be an opportunity to highlight this and to engage investors, because when you have a much bigger market, you no longer suffer the problems of scale. Small markets mean very little production run. You just produce for tiny markets, so your cost structure is high. And that's the advantage that Asian, European, and North American producers have. They've got these massive markets. And so we're trying to replicate scale to bring investors to the continent. The second big opportunity is the economic reconstruction and recovery plan that the President announced in Parliament. It identifies opportunities in infrastructure, new investment there that will be galvanized, and on localization, getting more products made here in South Africa. There are other elements to it, tourism and so on, that members of the media would be familiar with. And this is our opportunity. It's the first, the package has been announced in Parliament for government to put the package as a whole to investors as a group, domestic investors and foreign investors. Now you may ask the question, is it wise to have an investment conference during a pandemic? And we thought about it and we decided to proceed. We decided to proceed because though these are challenging times, we are now shifting our focus to economic recovery and to reconstruction. And investment plays a critical role. And we think there are first mover advantages that can be obtained, and that we need to get more going by way of the visibility of investment opportunities. Briefly on the structure, Trudi will deal with more of the details, but day one, the 17th of November, form of a series of focused sector-level discussions, and they would, for example, will have one session with a panel engaging on opportunities in the agriculture value chain. What more can be done? What can be localized? Where are export opportunities? How do we unlock the enormous market on the continent there? Energy clearly will feature in our thinking, because one of the enormous constraints to deeper levels of investment, the cost and reliability of supply of energy. So that would be a focused discussion. Range of other ones, a particular conversation about manufacturing and the continental free trade area. We will look at the future, the digital economy. We will look at rebuilding small businesses and tourism markets. But as I indicate, Trudi will tell you more about it. Two of the conference, which will be really, if you like, the plenary, in old-fashioned pre-pandemic language, would be on the 18th of November. And on that occasion, it will be a hybrid. I'm going to leave for Trudi to share with you. And it will include a discussion with social partners. So we will have business and labor representatives sharing the platform with the president and engaging on what can be done and what need to be done. We'll also look at video footage of different projects that are currently underway, examples of successes. And we're going to be trying to think through what are some of the challenges, because when you call a conference like this, you also want to know the problems so that we are able to address those. What are the inhibitors on that 664 billion rand commitment off the ground? Much of our focus will be on consolidation, on making sure that which business pledged can be implemented, where there needs to be unblocking of a problem, some regulatory license that need to be facilitated, some challenge with access to, let's say, transport, water. That would be the kind of conversation, because it's often in these details rather than in the big that the problems manifest themselves. We will also have a profiling of new investment pledges by firms. We're not focused as much on fresh investment pledges because much of the conference will be to get that 664 billion rand implemented, but there are companies that are now ready to make some fresh pledges, and there will be an opportunity for them to indicate that. So broadly speaking, in a difficult time, we think those countries, those economies that can show a greater value proposition, a greater openness to fresh investment, and a preparedness to unblock and fix the problems that investors face, are more likely to find a higher level of investment. We need to do it, particularly now, given that globally FDI flows are likely to be lower both this year and next year. But there's also a conversation with South African investors and mobilizing South African investment muscle behind the efforts of reconstruction. Finally, it's to talk about the African continent. South Africa today is the biggest African investor in other African countries. We're the sixth largest investor on the continent with an FDI stock in 2018, last available figures, of more than R500 billion. So we also play a critical role in stimulating growth across the continent, which helps to create more markets for South African goods and creates jobs for South Africans and opportunities for local and smaller entrepreneurs. I would like then to really leave a lot of the detail in Trudi's hands to share with you, for the opportunity to share the rationale, the context, and the structure with you. Trudi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Good morning, colleagues, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us this morning. As the Minister mentioned, I'm going to provide some of the details of the conference, but I think he's touched on all the main aspects, so I'll keep my remarks quite brief. As the Minister has mentioned, the main plenary is on the 18th of November, and that's preceded by a purely virtual event on the 17th of November. Now, I think it's important to underscore that all precautions will be taken to ensure that the event meets the requirements for COVID-19. We expect attendance to be down by 90%, not because we're not successful this year, but because we want to meet the regulations that are in force. So we will have a very limited number of delegates in person on the 18th, but we'll ensure that we cover representation from the private sector, the investment community, listed companies, emerging firms and entrepreneurs, as well as business associations, labor and civil society. Like in previous years, we will also have several ministers who will be present, particularly the day before at the sectoral roundtables, to ensure that there's robust discussion on policy implementation. Floor space utilization at the Sandton Convention Center will be well below 50% in all the venues that we have booked. And screening, sanitizing, and masking requirements will apply. Now, the good thing, of course, is that with a virtual physical hybrid on the 18th is that we're able to accommodate a much broader global audience online. And so far, we've had over 1,000 online delegates who have registered, and we expect much more than that. And we'll also time some of the panels and the discussion, particularly on the plenary day, to accommodate as many time zones as possible. People can register their interest in attending online at sainvestmentconference.co.za. So that's the conference website, sainvestmentconference.co.za. And as I mentioned, it will be streamed on the day. It will also be broadcast by SABC. Now, in terms of the content focus areas for the conference, on the first day, like in previous years, the opening will be by the President. And this will include an update on investment commitments. He had already begun doing this in the Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, but he'll give more details around the health of the investment pipeline, and also linking it to the economic recovery plan. A lot of investment, of course, turns on the enabling environment. So there will be a discussion of the structural reforms that were agreed upon by all the social partners ahead of the economic recovery plan being adopted. I think it's a positive step that we no longer talk about reforms in general, but that there's actually a specific set that all social partners have agreed upon. The President will also talk about infrastructure as a key element of the recovery, but also all of the other elements of the plan, particularly the sectoral plans that underpin the growth story in the economy. After that, there would be a panel. And I think the key here would be to emphasize the story of resilience and adaptation to COVID-19 and the opportunities that have been opened up by a new way of doing business, a new way of thinking about supply chains, and also future opportunities. As Minister mentioned, the focus is on consolidation, but we'll also, of course, profile new investments that have come to bear. But the idea is that we are, in a sense, midway through the investment mobilization drive, and we need to take stock about on where we are. Finally, so the conference is half a day on the plenary day on the 18th. I think it's very tight focused on a few key issues, and then the president will close, having reflected on what companies have had to say, the key success stories that have been shared, and the opportunities that have been presented. He will close by then also demonstrating what the way forward is on policy implementation and what government's commitments are. Now to go back to the 17th, which are the sector-focused panels. And how we're going to run them, there will be 3 sets of 3 running concurrently. There might be slight changes towards the end, but certainly the framework is to have 3 by 3. And so, as Minister has mentioned, there will be one on energy. I think it's quite well known what the issues are there, but also thinking about opportunities more broadly that exist within the integrated resource plan. There'll be a panel on small business growth opportunities, particularly looking as to how small businesses have fared under COVID. Those who
apologies for that small glitch there, but there you have it. The country is now open for business. This year's SA Investment Conference will go ahead with all the limitations and COVID-19 protocols in place, of course, at the Sandton Convention Centre on the 17th, which will be a fully virtual version, and the 18th with a limited